More than 500 years ago, there was a food so valuable that people refused to eat it. Not because it tasted bad, because spending it meant becoming poorer. It wasn't made of gold or silver. It grew on trees. The Aztecs collected it as tribute. Merchants carried thousands of it across mountains. Rulers drank it from decorated cups. Entire provinces were prized simply because they could grow it. This isn't the history of chocolate. It's the history of the bean that became wealth. To understand why a bean could become one of the most valuable objects in the Americas, we have to go back nearly 3,500 years. Long before the Aztecs, long before the great Maya cities, deep inside the tropical forests of what is now southern Mexico and Central America, grew a small evergreen tree, Theobroma cacao. Its scientific name, given thousands of years later, means food of the gods. But long before scientists named it, people were already fascinated by it. Around 1500 BC, the Olmecs became the first known civilization to make widespread use of cacao. The tree wasn't their invention. Nature had created it millions of years earlier. Their discovery was something different. They learned how to transform its fruit. Inside every colorful cacao pod were dozens of bitter seeds. Eating them raw wasn't especially enjoyable, but fermentation changed everything. The sweet white pulp surrounding the seeds began fermenting naturally. Afterward, the beans could be dried, roasted, ground, and mixed with water. The result wasn't chocolate. Not yet. It was a dark, bitter, foamy drink unlike anything we know today. There was no milk, very little sweetness. Sometimes it was flavored with flowers, vanilla, or chili peppers. It was earthy, intense, almost medicinal. Yet people kept drinking it because cacao offered something few other plants could. It was difficult to grow. The trees demanded constant warmth, heavy rainfall, rich tropical soil. Years passed before a young tree produced meaningful harvests. Move the tree only a little too far from its ideal climate, and production collapsed. Not every kingdom could grow cacao. That scarcity quietly gave it value, long before anyone imagined using it in trade. As centuries passed, the Olmecs disappeared. But cacao did not. The Maya inherited it, expanded its cultivation, and elevated it into something far greater than an ordinary crop. Archaeological discoveries show cacao appearing on painted vessels, inside royal tombs, and across extensive trade networks stretching between tropical lowlands and distant cities where cacao trees could never survive. The farther the beans traveled, the more valuable they became. They became diplomatic gifts, ceremonial offerings, symbols of prestige, objects worthy of kings. By the 14th century, when the Aztecs rose to power in central Mexico, cacao had already been treasured for well over 1,500 years. But the Aztecs would transform its role forever. They wouldn't simply drink it. They would build part of an empire around it. And that's when a humble tropical seed became something astonishing: wealth. By the 15th century, the Aztec Empire stretched across much of central Mexico. It was one of the most powerful civilizations in the Americas. Its armies conquered city after city. Its markets drew thousands of merchants every day. Its rulers governed millions of people. But there was one problem: the Aztec heartland wasn't well suited for growing cacao. The climate was too cool. The tree simply wouldn't thrive there. The empire depended on distant tropical regions for its supply. That made cacao something more than a luxury. It became a strategic resource. When the Aztecs conquered neighboring kingdoms, they didn't simply demand soldiers or precious stones. Many were required to pay tribute in cacao. Year after year, bags of dried beans flowed toward the imperial capital of Tenochtitlan. Tribute records preserved in colonial-era documents list enormous quantities arriving from provinces where cacao flourished. Those beans helped supply the empire's markets, its rulers, its ceremonies, and its growing economy. Over generations, cacao took on another role. It became a practical medium of exchange, not because an emperor declared it the official currency, but because enough people agreed it held value. A merchant could exchange cacao for food. A porter might receive cacao as payment. Market records recorded prices in beans. Even small everyday purchases could be measured in cacao. Spanish observers later described markets where a rabbit, a turkey egg, or a woven cloth each had prices expressed in cacao beans. The exact values varied by place and time, but the idea remained remarkably consistent. The bean had become money. It worked because cacao possessed many qualities people expect from currency. It was valuable, portable, divisible, difficult to produce, widely desired, and unlike decorative objects, it always had another use. If nobody wanted to trade it, they could still prepare it as a drink. Few forms of money have ever been edible. Cacao was. Of course, no currency is perfect. Beans could be damaged. Harvests changed from year to year. Spanish accounts even describe dishonest traders hollowing out cacao beans and filling them with dirt before resealing the shells. A reminder that counterfeiters have existed for almost as long as money itself. Yet despite its imperfections, the system endured. Because value has never depended only on metal or paper, it depends on trust. And for the Aztecs, cacao had earned that trust over many centuries. But the bean represented more than commerce. It represented status. Most ordinary people rarely drank cacao prepared in its richest forms. The finest beverages were associated with nobles, warriors, priests, and rulers. Among them was Montezuma II. Spanish chroniclers described elaborate ceremonies in which cacao was served in decorated vessels during royal feasts. Some accounts claim he consumed many cups each day. The exact number remains debated by historians. What isn't debated is that cacao had become one of the strongest symbols of prestige in the empire. It appeared in rituals, religious offerings, diplomatic exchanges, royal banquets. To possess cacao was to possess influence. To drink it was to display status. For more than 1,500 years, one tropical tree had slowly climbed the ladder of human importance, from forest fruit to sacred drink, to luxury, to wealth. The Aztecs had elevated cacao higher than any civilization before them. Then, ships appeared on the horizon, and the meaning of cacao would change forever. In 1519, strange ships appeared along the coast of Mexico. They carried just a few hundred Spanish soldiers, led by a man named Hernán Cortés. At first glance, they seemed hopelessly outnumbered. The Aztec Empire ruled millions. The Spanish numbered only in the hundreds. Yet within 2 years, one of the greatest civilizations in the Americas would collapse. Disease, alliances with indigenous enemies of the Aztecs, advanced weaponry, and political instability all played their part. When the fighting ended in 1521, Spain inherited far more than territory. It inherited cacao. To the Spanish, the drink was unfamiliar. The first Europeans who tasted it often described it as bitter, spicy, even unpleasant. It looked nothing like the chocolate we know today. But they quickly noticed something far more important. The people who ruled the empire treasured it. The markets depended on it. Merchants carried it. Tribute delivered it. Wherever wealth moved, cacao seemed to move with it. Cortés recognized its economic importance. Not because it tasted good, but because it represented value. Spain had arrived searching for precious metals, Instead, it discovered another treasure growing from trees, rather than replacing cacao. The Spanish took control of it. They expanded cultivation, protected valuable growing regions, and began shipping beans across the Atlantic. At first, Europe wasn't interested. The drink remained too bitter for many tastes. Then, something changed. Sugar. As European sugar production expanded throughout the Caribbean, cacao found its perfect companion. Sweetened chocolate became fashionable among Spanish aristocrats. From Spain, it spread into France, Italy, the Habsburg courts of Europe, then England. For the wealthy, chocolate became a luxury unlike almost anything else. It was expensive, exotic, imported from across an ocean, served in elegant cups, consumed in royal palaces. Owning chocolate became a statement. Serving it became a display of status. Demand rose rapidly, and demand created pressure. Pressure for more land, more harvests, more labor. Spain and other European powers expanded cacao plantations throughout their American colonies. Many indigenous communities were forced into brutal labor systems, as those populations declined from disease, violence, and exploitation. Enslaved Africans were increasingly forced onto colonial plantations. The sweet drink enjoyed in European courts carried an enormous human cost. For many people, cacao became a symbol of luxury. For countless others, it became a symbol of suffering. By the 17th century, the bean that had once symbolized prestige in Mesoamerica had become the foundation of a growing global trade. Its journey was no longer confined to the Americas. It had become one of the world's first truly international luxury commodities. And Europe wasn't content sharing it. Every colonial empire wanted a piece of the cacao trade. The race had only just begun. Once Europe developed a taste for chocolate, there was no turning back. Demand grew faster than supply, and soon Spain's monopoly began to crack. Other European powers wanted what Spain had, not just the drink, but the profits behind it. Portugal expanded cacao cultivation in Brazil. The French planted cacao throughout their Caribbean colonies. The Dutch carried it into parts of Southeast Asia. The British established plantations wherever tropical conditions allowed. No single nation wanted to depend on another for something so valuable. Cacao had become a prize of empire. Across the tropics, new plantations appeared. Forests were cleared. Rivers were redirected. Entire landscapes were reshaped to grow a single crop. The goal wasn't simply agriculture. It was commerce. Every ship leaving the Americas loaded with cacao represented another fortune crossing the Atlantic. As production expanded, prices slowly began to fall. A drink once reserved almost exclusively for kings, aristocrats, and wealthy merchants gradually reached lawyers, doctors, bankers, and the growing European middle class. Chocolate was becoming less exclusive, but producing it remained brutally expensive because someone still had to grow the beans. Throughout much of the colonial period, that burden fell on enslaved labor. First, indigenous communities, whose populations collapsed under disease, violence, and forced work. Then millions of enslaved Africans, transported across the Atlantic to work plantations throughout the Americas. For many Europeans, chocolate represented elegance, comfort, luxury. For those forced to produce it, it often represented unimaginable suffering. The history of chocolate's popularity cannot be separated from the history of colonialism or slavery. As abolition movements gathered strength during the 19th century, the industry adapted once again. European colonial powers increasingly expanded cacao cultivation into West Africa. Countries that are now Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire eventually became the center of global production. That shift permanently changed the geography of cacao. Even today, Most of the world's cacao still comes from West Africa. The continents changed. The empires changed. But one thing remained remarkably consistent. The world's appetite for cacao only kept growing. Chocolate spread across the world. Its profits spread just as quickly. Its suffering did too. Then, the Industrial Revolution arrived, and cacao's biggest transformation was still ahead. For more than 3,000 years, people consumed cacao in almost the same way. It was roasted, ground, mixed with water, and served as a drink, sometimes bitter, sometimes sweetened, but almost always liquid. Then the 19th century changed everything. The Industrial Revolution was transforming the world. Factories replaced workshops. Machines replaced hand labor. Mass production replaced craftsmanship. Soon, those same forces reached cacao. In 1828, a Dutch chemist named Coenraad van Houten developed a machine that would permanently change chocolate, the cocoa press. By squeezing roasted cacao, the machine separated much of its cocoa butter from the solid cocoa mass. What remained could be ground into a fine powder. For the first time, cacao became easier to process, easier to transport, more consistent, and far less expensive to manufacture. It wasn't simply a better machine, it completely changed what chocolate could become. Less than 20 years later, another breakthrough arrived. In 1847, English chocolatier J.S. Fry & Sons discovered that mixing cocoa powder back together with cocoa butter and sugar created a smooth paste that could be poured into molds. For the first time, people could hold chocolate in their hands. The modern chocolate bar had been born. One invention changed how cacao was processed. The next changed how the world consumed it. Chocolate was no longer something you only drank. Now, you could unwrap it. Factories across Europe quickly adopted the new techniques. Soon, companies like Cadbury, Lindt, Nestlé, and later Hershey turned chocolate into one of the world's first truly mass-produced luxury foods. Production increased. Prices fell. What had once belonged almost exclusively to emperors, priests, and aristocrats slowly reached ordinary families. For the first time in history, children could grow up thinking chocolate was normal, something previous generations could scarcely imagine. But every bar carried an invisible cost. As demand exploded, so did the need for cacao. More forests disappeared, more plantations expanded, more farmers became dependent on a single global crop. Chocolate had become affordable. Producing it was still anything but simple. Industry made chocolate ordinary. Growing cacao never was. Today, billions of people eat chocolate every year, yet very few know where it begins or who makes it possible. That part of the story is still unfolding. Today, cacao is grown across the tropical belt, but one region stands above all others: West Africa. Countries like Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana now produce well over half of the world's cacao. Every year, millions of tons of beans leave their ports, bound for factories thousands of miles away. They will become chocolate bars, cakes, cookies, ice cream, and countless other foods enjoyed by billions of people. Yet there's an extraordinary irony. The bean that once represented wealth rarely makes the people who grow it wealthy. Most cacao is produced by smallholder farmers. Many work only a few hectares of land. Their incomes rise and fall with unpredictable harvests, changing weather, plant diseases, and volatile global prices. By the time a chocolate bar reaches a supermarket shelf, its value has increased many times over. But only a small fraction returns to the people who cultivated the cacao itself. The journey from tropical farm to luxury confection is one of the longest supply chains in the modern food industry. Science has also revealed why cacao fascinated people long before anyone understood chemistry. Inside every bean are hundreds of natural compounds. Among them is theobromine, a mild stimulant related to caffeine. Cacao also contains flavonols, plant compounds that researchers have linked to cardiovascular health and blood flow. Dark chocolate, especially varieties with high cacao content, may offer health benefits when consumed in moderation as part of a balanced diet. Modern science didn't make cacao remarkable. It simply explained part of what ancient civilizations had already experienced. They knew this drink felt different. They just couldn't see the chemistry behind it. More importantly, science has shown that cacao's value was never only about nutrition. It was about culture, identity, status, trade, power. Few plants have influenced human civilization in so many different ways, yet the story isn't entirely one of progress. Investigations continue to document child labor in parts of the modern cacao industry. Deforestation remains a serious concern in some producing regions, and climate change is making cacao cultivation increasingly difficult in places where it has thrived for generations. The history of cacao isn't something we finished writing centuries ago. It's still being written. Every harvest, every season, every chocolate bar. For thousands of years, cacao has created extraordinary wealth. The challenge has always been deciding who receives it. And that brings us to perhaps the most remarkable part of cacao's story. Not where it came from, but where it has brought us. The next time you unwrap a chocolate bar, you're holding far more than a sweet. You're holding the legacy of the Olmecs, who first transformed a wild forest fruit into something worth preserving. The trade networks of the Maya, who carried cacao across hundreds of miles. The wealth of the Aztecs, who turned tiny beans into one of history's most remarkable stores of value. The ships of the Spanish Empire that carried cacao across the Atlantic. The plantations of colonial powers that expanded its production at immense human cost. The factories of the Industrial Revolution that transformed an elite luxury into an everyday food. And the work of millions of farmers today who still grow the crop that keeps the world supplied with chocolate. Few foods have traveled a longer journey. Fewer still have shaped economies, religions, trade, science, and culture across so many centuries. Cacao has been a sacred offering, a royal drink, a symbol of status, a form of currency, a global commodity, and today, one of the world's most beloved foods. Its history is filled with extraordinary ingenuity and extraordinary exploitation, with celebration and suffering, with discovery and desire.
For your approval, madam.
Today, more people are asking where their chocolate comes from. Fair trade programs, direct trade partnerships, and sustainable farming initiatives are trying to ensure that more of cacao's value reaches the people who grow it. Progress is being made, but the story isn't finished. Millions of farming families still struggle with low incomes. Child labor continues to be documented in parts of the industry. Forests are still disappearing to meet global demand. Just as cacao once forced empires to ask who controlled wealth, today it asks a different question. Who truly benefits from it? The bean that once measured wealth still measures our values. Perhaps that's the most remarkable part of cacao's story. After more than 3,000 years, this tiny seed is still shaping human lives.
Not because it changed, because we did. Empires rose and disappeared. Religions spread. Trade routes shifted. Machines transformed the world. Yet cacao endured through all of it. The next time you eat chocolate, remember, you're not simply tasting cocoa or sugar or milk. You're tasting one of humanity's oldest relationships with a single plant. A relationship built on curiosity, trade, power, innovation, and sacrifice. You're tasting history. If this story changed the way you see chocolate, subscribe. Every week, we uncover the hidden histories behind the foods and drinks you consume every day. Because behind every ordinary meal, there's often an extraordinary story. And tell us in the comments, what's one food you eat every week whose history you'd like to discover next? Because history isn't only found in museums. Sometimes it's waiting in your pantry.